دایی یه فرصت خوب حالا پشت مدافعان خداداد عزیزی توی دروازه گل برای ایران خداداد عزیزی باز هم روی زمین گشت سرداران بود و توی سرداران بود گل به نام آزمونده برای ایران
بزنه کریم انصاری گل توی دروازه کریم انصاری دروازه پرتغال باز شد
علی دایی سام توپ توی دروازه
اشتباه حرکت از قوچان نژاد فرصت برای قوچان نژاد توی دروازه گل برای ایران.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Goal Bezan. I'm so excited to be here. Happy Nowruz to everyone listening. Pezhman, Sina, lovely to be with you today.
Happy Nowruz.
Yeah, good to be speaking to both of you. And as you both said, Happy Nowruz. And I hope everyone's celebrating as a lovely few days ahead with their loved ones.
I want to kick off the podcast because we've got a lot of stuff to get through. We did on the previous one talk about the rumors when it came to which manager would take over the national team. The national team coach has now been announced, Amir Ghalenoei. And I want to kick off firstly to basically talk about him. So Sina, what do you think of the appointment? And yeah, what are your sort of like general thoughts?
Underwhelming, obviously not an option we wanted to end up with, but I think the way the last few months have gone, it looked like the federation had put all its eggs in the Felix Sanchez basket, and then once that was kind of confirmed that he was going to Ecuador, they weren't really left with many options, especially because it's mid-season. I don't think there were that many kind of good quality coaches available. And one thing that I've realized, and this is mostly looking at Africa as a continent, but also Asia, and comparing it maybe to 2 or 3 decades ago, is that on certain times, certain occasions, depending on the circumstances, sometimes it's better to go with a local coach than a third or a fourth degree kind of European coach who may not end up adding much to you anyway. Now, Wilmots wasn't regarded as a third or fourth level European coach, but we also how he did. So I think Ghalenoei is an acceptable option in the short term as a stopgap to fill in the position and to see us through the Asian Cup. But I think it's kind of obvious that in the long term we need a much better option. And I'm hoping that the federation are still looking, are still keeping the conversations in the kind of behind the scenes to make sure that come the end of Asian Cup, regardless of the results, we go with a coach that can see us through maybe the next 5 or 6 years up to the next Asian Cup. So we'll see. But in terms of the next year, Ghalenoei, yeah, out of the Iranian options, he's one that you could probably trust more than the rest because of his experience, and obviously it goes without saying that his knowledge of Iranian football, not just in terms of the players, but in terms of Iranian football as a whole, what goes on behind the scenes, the games that sometimes you have to play, is next to none.
Yeah, and I think the behind the scenes right now, given the context, is especially important. I mentioned on the last podcast, like I think having a Persian coach right now is incredibly important for this maybe transitionary period. So yeah, I completely agree with you there. But Pezhman, so he's already managed the national team before, so 2006, 2007. He's come from Golgohar. So like, what has he improved as a coach? Do you mind like giving a bit of a recap on his previous stint?
I mean, the stint 2006-07 was so long time ago, and he didn't really get like a chance to prove himself. It was kind of like this situation now, a temporary solution. But looking at his record in the Iranian league, I would probably rate him as one of the best Iranian coaches ever in terms of getting results in the Iranian league. Like, let's be honest, Golgohar Sirjan, it's not a team that you will talk about when you talk about the top teams in Iran, but he's done really good with them. He had Istiqlal in 3 different occasions, I believe, and they always have gotten good results. And maybe the most important thing here is that every team in Iran that he have managed, he have brought up some new young players that have come into the national team to establish themselves. I think he had a good run in Teraktor Sazi as well. What Sina mentioned maybe is the most important thing. If you have this kind of solution with Amir Ghalenoei, then you can't start from zero. You need to have somebody that knows the do's and don'ts in Iranian football, in Iranian football federation, the culture, the behind the scenes. I mean, he's the master of it, to be honest. He's probably one of the worst in that case, or maybe one of the best. So I think it's the best option that we had today.
Sina, so he's coming on to manage the Asian Cup, which I think we looked at this last episode. It hasn't actually been confirmed for January 24, but I guess like that's when it will happen. But the question I wanted to ask you is you mentioned how it's a transitionary period. It's probably a temporary solution. I guess should the federation still be looking for a longer term replacement?
Absolutely. Firstly, in terms of the Asian Cup has been confirmed that it will be in January. The draw for the group stages will be in May. I think it's the first week of May. So we're only just kind of over a month away from finding out who will be facing in the group stages. In terms of the long term, as I mentioned, Ghalenoei cannot be the long term solution because I think we can do better and we deserve better. Ghalenoei, in his first stint, if you wanted to compare him as a manager from a technical perspective, I think he was a lot more, let's say, up to date then, and his ideas were a lot more up to date at that particular point in time than he is right now. I think his strengths right now isn't so much the technical side, it's more that his experience to be able to manage the team. And I think this is where it's, I think, vital for him to have good quality coaches, assistant coaches, to bring fresh ideas to the teams. And his job will be more or less managing that and getting the best, not just out of the players, but out of his technical staff as well. Now, I think, like I said, in the long run, I would prefer a European coach or a foreign coach, let's say, with much higher experiences at the top level, maybe even international level, and one that could really, when his name gets announced, you would be excited. You would think, okay, I can imagine this person really getting us not just getting the best out of the players, but also maybe pushing the team to the next level. Because now that's what we should be looking at. You know, the Karish era was great, but every era has an ending, and that has ended now. We couldn't go to the second round of the World Cup, but now with the number of teams expanding in the 2026 World Cup, that should be the goal, that whoever comes in next has the ability to take us to the second round in the next World Cup.
Let's talk about this quickly before we talk about the squad that's just been announced. So he's taking over the squad for the Asian Cup. So I like, we did talk about this in a few episodes ago where it was like, what should our expectations be beyond the World Cup going into the Asian Cup? Should we be expected to be one of the favorites to win the tournament? I mean, some people said no, some people said yes. But the thing is, our players right now, especially the Taremi and even Alireza Jahanbakhsh playing in Feyenoord right now, like, they're performing extremely well. They're in very good form. Do you, even though we've got a new manager, Pezhman, do you expect like us to challenge for the Asian Cup?
Yeah, I mean, there are always these 4, 5, maybe even 6 teams in Asia that challenges for the title. And we all know who they are: Iran, South Korea, Japan, Australia, Saudi Arabia, maybe like Iraq, maybe Qatar, could make some upset. But I want to say something before I forget. And it's like, do we want another Skocic situation? Somebody actually getting the results, but people in the federation or the players or media or whatever push the narrative that this guy is wrong. Maybe he is, maybe he isn't. That's something that we outsiders don't know. But can we afford to do another of these mistakes? I think the Skocic thing and the situation in Iran are maybe two points making it kind of hard for Iran getting a foreign coach, because you can't be trusted. I mean, Iran can't be trusted with that track record we had with Skocic, and that's maybe why we didn't get a name that we wanted. It's hard to say, but I'm afraid that the Skocic thing maybe harmed us more than we believe.
No, I actually completely agree with you, because it definitely sent out a bad message, given how public it was as well. Like, I've never seen that with any other national team. So I completely agree with you. So when it comes to going forward now, in terms of the Asian Cup, do you have like high hopes?
Don't we always have like high hopes? But once again, I mean, Iran and like I think it's South Korea. They haven't won the Asian Cup for like 60 years or something like that. Somebody can please check that up during the pod, and we'll see. So Iran won't come into this as favorites, because I think the coaching issue will harm us. I think there will be some lack of motivation for the players until the actual Asian Cup begins, and maybe we can see it even now with the squad that we're going to talk about soon. So many players missing, with this kind of attitude being allowed during Queiroz era, probably not. But we all know that these kind of friendlies in the high intense time of the league isn't very popular amongst anyone. So maybe they see their chance to actually say no to the national team to play against Kenya, So I think it will be interesting to see how Ghalenoei copes with that, instead of like what kind of formation, what kind of players he will have to deal with.
Yeah, I completely agree. So let's talk about the squad now. So before we go on to your thoughts, there are, as you said, a lot of notable exceptions from both the injury front as well as managerial decisions, as well as like some personal problems. So you've got, I'm not going to go through the whole list because there's quite a few, but the notable ones in terms of injury. So Majid Hosseini injured, Morteza Pouraliganji's injured. Who else have we got? Omid Ebrahimi, but I think he's been injured for a while, to be fair. I think that's it. Ali Alipour. Have I missed anyone out? No, I think that's it. But then all the other players like notable that have been excluded from either managerial or personal reasons. Saman, Rodus, Sarah Azmoun as well pulled out today due to family issues. So we've got a lot of notable exceptions. Sina, what's been the surprising one for you?
Firstly, I think, especially after the World Cup, when we saw the likes of Omid Ebrahimi returning, I think this is a good time to move on from these players who are into their late 30s. Omid Ebrahimi, maybe even Ansari Fad to a certain extent. Asian Cup, I've always thought, is an opportunity for us to, yes, we have the backbone of the team. We know the main, let's say 14, 15 players that will be the key players, but the rest of it can be players that we know will have a future at the national team, and they will kind of benefit from the experience of going to a major tournament. Now, one of those players is Mohamed Amin Hasbawi, who I think plays for Fulhad as well, has done fantastically well as a young defender. So obviously his inclusion is great, sends a signal as well to the younger players that when they get the opportunity, if they perform, there is space for them on the team. But other than that, there isn't really anyone in there that you would think, oh, that's a surprise. Obviously, there is the usual few changes that you would see when a new manager comes in. But I think the exclusion, mainly for me, the exclusion of someone like Amir Ghaleneoi was a bit surprising. Although, yes, second or third choice goalkeeper, but he's a goalkeeper that plays in Europe. I would have certainly put him next to Hosseini and Bezan, but obviously it's Ghalenoi's decision. And also, considering the short time that Ghalenoei has between now and the Asian Cup in January. And this goes regardless of who the new manager was, by the way, not just Ghalenoei. These camps are an opportunity for them to try new players, try new combinations, new formations, new tactics to see what works. Because like I said, we know who the backbone of the team is. It's more finding out the rest of the squad that kind of makes up a potential Asian Cup winning squad.
I will say this for him, actually. He's gone into this already making decisions that might be semi-unpopular because he's already prioritizing maybe youth over experience, which, as you said, we had one of the oldest squads in the World Cup. This was a long time coming for us as a national team. So I kind of welcome these decisions. As you said, Omid Rahmi should have probably moved on before. And Ansari Fard, he did perform okay in the World Cup and then the friendlies before that, but same sort of thing. But Pezhman, like from that squad, which ones are you sort of like excited for? Which ones are you surprised at?
The young full-out player that Sina mentioned, and to be honest, the names are not really that interesting for me. I really want to see how Ghalenoei, with his short amount of time, of course, gonna feel his element, his tactics, his way of playing. Will we have the same kind of ideas versus Russia as we have versus Kenya? Will he? Because let's face it, maybe at least 5 or 10 of these players won't make it to the Asian Cup squad, is my guess. So as Sina also mentioned, this is a great opportunity for them to show themselves and to be to earn that spot. So the names, I like to see them all, to be honest. Even like Jahanbakhsh, as we know, he did great under Skocic. He didn't do great under Queiroz. Can somebody like Ghalenoei find the right type of system for a player like Jahanbakhsh, who can be really good when he's good, but he can be, awful, or like it feels like Iran playing with 10 players when he's really bad. So I'm more interested to see what will Ghalenoei do. How will he respond to a quick goal, or will he let a player like Ehsan Haj Safi be a part of the squad in Asian Cup 2024? Probably not, but I'm more interested in Ghalenoei than anyone else, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, even with Jahanbakhsh, like even today when they played against Ajax, and they've got to the top of the table, and he was kind of pivotal in that performance today. So yeah, like he could very easily build an entire team around him, right? Like if he, but you never know what sort of Alireza is going to turn up. That's the issue. But yeah, I completely agree with you. So you guys happy to move on to the Iran-Russia preview? Is there anything else you want to mention?
Just one point on Asian Cup. I've always thought Asian Cup is a very interesting tournament on the international stage, mainly because of the timing. You always come straight after the World Cup, usually within a 6-month period after the World Cup, whereas now there's that 1-year gap. And I think it tends to favor teams that have a little bit more consistency in terms of the managers that are there. You go back to 2019. Obviously, Felix Sanchez had worked with those players from younger age groups, and 2015, I think it was Ange Postecoglou who had been there for a few years. So I think teams that tend to make a change in managerial positions just before the Asian Cup, so in that gap between the World Cup and the Asian Cup, it doesn't end up kind of benefiting them too much. So for me, the favorites will be undoubtedly Japan and Saudi Arabia, mainly because of how they performed at the World Cup, but also the fact that they have good managers, having worked with those players and built a team, which is exactly what Pezhman mentioned, Ghalenoei being able to kind of build a unit that works in such a short space of time. So for me, I wouldn't really put us as the favorite for the Asian Cup. Obviously, with the players that we have, you would expect us to get to the kind of much kind of the later stages of the competition. But for me, the favorites will be mainly Japan and possibly Saudi Arabia as well.
Just quickly as well, before we move on to the Russia preview, I forgot to mention that Alayar Sayedmanesh he's recovered from injury. He's playing for Hull now, Hull City, but he's also not in the squad due to a technical decision. So yeah, just to mention that there's a lot of different exclusions.
Ali
So I knew I'd
Karimi
miss,
as well in
and Ali Karimi as well.
Turkey.
Yeah.
So that's like a 6-7 decent players.
Yeah. I mean, it's a long list. So yeah. Okay. Cool. Let's move on to the Iran-Russia preview. Firstly, is like we always struggle to get friendlies. We've always anticipated this, so I think like this is, as bad as it sounds, is probably one of the better ones, given the current situation, which I know sounds awful, but Russia is a pretty decent team if you just want to talk from a football standpoint. So yeah, Pezhman, are you excited for that game? Do you think it's a good test for them, especially Ghalenoei as a new manager?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure of the status of Russia, to be honest. Due to the war, the national team haven't played so many games together. I mean, how do they feel about friendly game in Iran? Is that like what they're looking for in their so-called comeback? It's hard to say what Russia will do out of this. We know that they're a good team. They're a decent team. They would probably made it to the World Cup 2022 if they didn't get banned from FIFA. And who knows? Maybe we'll get Russia in the Asian Confederation and have them a part of the World Cup qualifiers. I mean, it's not the Russia that we maybe are used to see, since the players haven't met each other in like a long time, and we don't know what to expect from them. So Iran should be a slight favorite there.
Yeah, and they're playing in Tehran on the 23rd of March, so it is very, very soon. Sina, what do you think about it?
Yeah, as Pezhman mentioned, I think from a kind of a looking at it from a political point of view, with everything that's happening at the moment, they are, and obviously we've heard rumors as well, that they are looking to explore the possibility of joining Asia as far as football is concerned. And considering you kind of look at the games they're playing against Iran and against Iraq as well, I think in the same window, and the fact that Zenit, for example, played against Sepahan in a friendly a few weeks ago, and the fact that their relations are quite good with China, and looking at it from an East Asian point of view, it may not be it may not be unlikely that they would join Asia. So it might happen sooner than we think, and this might be one of the ways.
Sorry, I like that idea of Russia giving Asia a better competition, just like when Australia joined. I mean, it's good for Asian football.
It is, looking at it from a football perspective, and also again when you consider the fact that Asia's spots at the World Cup will be increasing, we could definitely do with that competition, because now with those spots kind of increasing, you're looking at South Korea, Japan, Iran, Australia, potentially Saudi Arabia being kind of guaranteed spots at the World Cup, which takes away that kind of competitive mentality of going into certain games. So yeah, adding more competition and generally improving the level of football in Asia is certainly good. And regardless of the fact that Russia hasn't played in over a year, I think it might be. They still have good quality players, so it would still be a good test for us, considering we, as you said, we're missing 6 or 7 important players as well. So it would be a good test for the players coming in. So yeah, the result doesn't matter as much. As Pezhman said, it's more for us to see what kind of team, or at least what's the basic idea of Ghalenoei in terms of him being a manager, what kind of tactics, formation he's going to choose. So yeah, it could be a lot worse, as you said. We used to struggling to get friendly, so we've played against worse teams. So this is a good opponent.
Yeah, for sure. Before we move on to Andrew Flint, who's an expert on Russian football, I want to get your view on. So, would you rather Ghalenoei plays experimentative, or like given it as a friendly, or do you want him to play like more safe with the players that he kind of expects? Like, what sort of strategy would you want him to play, given that he's just moved into the role? I'll stay with you, Sina.
I think a little bit of both. I think balance is always important. You choose the formation and the setup that you think would work best for the team, and you mix up the key players with players that you think they may have enough to join in, kind of join the squad in the long term and then come the Asian Cup. Because otherwise, if you don't play any of the key players and you simply just give an opportunity to a team solely made up of uncapped players, although it's a great experience for them, what are you actually learning from these players trying to kind of play with the more established players? So I think balance is important. And in terms of the way Iran plays, I can't see Ghalenoei going and playing tiki-taka. He's never been that sort of a guy, and he's not going to be now either. Traditionally, when he started, I think he was playing a back three to begin with at Istiqlal. So he does have experience with that. So it'll be interesting from a formation point of view to see what he does. But from an actual approach, I can't see us playing expansive football.
Okay, cool. So let's go to Andrew Flint now, who Arya caught up with to talk about Russia and everything that they should expect as well from us.
Okay, I'm joined by Andrew Flint, a good friend of the podcast, Russian football expert. We've had him on before. Good to have you back on, Andrew.
It's good to be back, Arya. Thanks for inviting me back. And it makes a nice change to be talking about proper sport for what seems like a long time. So, I'm looking forward to this.
Good stuff. Andrew, of course, we're here to speak about the Iran against Russia friendly match that we played on the 23rd of March. We'll come on to that in a second, though. We want to discuss, first and foremost, the Russian national team. As we all know, if you've been reading the news over the last couple of years, there's been this war between Russia and Ukraine. That's obviously meant that the Russian national team hasn't played in a long time. Obviously, they've played 2 friendly matches just before the end of the year against Tajikistan and Uzbekistan. This will be the third game, the first game of the year for Russia. What's the general consensus for the national team of Russia?
Well, it's stating the obvious, a very strange time at the moment for the Russian national team with its expulsion from UEFA competition. So it's hard to know what direction the squad is going in. It's quite an interesting squad in some ways. There's a lot of uncapped players in there. I'd probably draw attention to people who aren't quite so familiar with the Russian national team to some really exciting youngsters. There's teenagers Sergei Pinyaev, who joined Lokomotiv Moscow in the winter break. And normally I would say that's a bad thing because Lokomotiv are a bit of a basket case club, really. But they've got a good young coach. They've signed some really good young players, so it's a good atmosphere for the youngster coming in. He went on trial a few times to Manchester United when he was younger, so he's one to look out for. He's absolutely electric, really good finishing, and I expect him to get some game time. And then there's the likes of Arsene Zakharian, who was rumoured to be close to a move to Chelsea. I think that's probably unlikely, although there was talk that he would consider switching his nationality to Armenian. He has Armenian heritage, which would make it slightly more comfortable, shall we say. Konstantin Chukavin up front, 20-year-old striker. There is no Artem Zuba up front. He's the all-time record goal scorer for the Russian national team and also in the Russian Premier League. He's just returned to Lokomotiv Moscow, but he's not in the squad. So there's some really interesting young players in there. And the goalkeepers is a funny one. Igor Akinfeev has been the goalkeeper, is the best Russian goalkeeper since the break of the Soviet Union anyway, without question. He's still playing for his club, CSKA Moscow, but he's not in the squad. So most of the players really have about 10, 15 caps at most. So it'll be very interesting to see how we do. And of course, a few of the players based in European football at the moment. Alexander Golovin at Monaco, Alexei Miranchuk in Serie A, who's not quite set it alight, but how they will come back, how they will fit in, should be very interesting. And I would say this is the best opposition Russia will have faced in quite some time. Certainly in the last 6 to 8 months or so. So it is good to have a real challenge. How they will tie together remains to be seen, but it will be a really interesting game for me.
Interesting news came out not long ago about Russia potentially wanting to join the AFC, the Asian Football Confederation. Didn't happen, but what happened there? What was the reasoning behind that?
Yeah, well, I mean, of course, this started when UEFA expelled Russia, or suspended Russia, I should say. And it's a situation linked, of course, to the current geopolitical situation. I have to be careful with the words I say, not because I'm trying to skirt around it, but actually there are laws about what you're allowed to say based here. Anyway, the point is this: UEFA were never going to allow Russian teams, international teams, club teams to compete. And it's not actually something I completely disagree with, because it would just be a complete logistical, societal nightmare. We saw teams in qualifying for the Qatar World Cup. Russia got through to the playoff stage. Poland refused to play against Russia. And I mean, it just would be, I think, too awkward for everybody involved. So I don't actually have a major issue with that myself at the moment. It just isn't the right situation. But it goes way beyond sport. There is a pivot in Russia in virtually all spheres, in business, in society, in tourism. I mean, we saw today or yesterday, I believe it was, visa demands for Russian and Iranian travelers between both countries scrapped. So Russians can now go to Iran without needing a visa. Other Asian countries, there's far more business, far more trade. And there is almost a feeling of, well, if Europe is going to, I'm not saying this is what I personally feel, but there is a mood of, well, if Europe's turning its back on Russia, well, let's look elsewhere. So there was consideration of applying to join the AFC, the Asian Confederation, and the sense I got was that had the Russian Football Union decided to do this, Russia possibly would have been accepted. It was actually a very, very close vote that went on in December, and the members, it really was almost on a knife edge, but they rejected the opportunity to make a formal bid to leave UEFA and join the AFC. And it's not without precedent, is it? We've seen Australia, of course, join the AFC for competitive reasons, and I think that's probably been a good thing for them and for the Confederation. For Russia, I don't think actually it would have helped anything, really, in my opinion. Yes, it would. If the AFC had accepted Russia, they would have been playing competitive qualifiers. But the real aim of all countries, of course, is to play in the World Cup. That's what drives a player's future, and that's just simply not going to happen, no matter what confederation Russia play in. But I think the club level is where it would have been more interesting. Russian clubs joining the Asian Champions League, it would have made a lot of sense in the short term, perhaps, because I think it's unlikely UEFA will accept Russian clubs back in for, I think, quite some time. That's my personal opinion. And the quality of the league, you would imagine, might start to suffer. But actually, as it turns out, not as many foreigners have left the Russian league as I expected. In fact, quite a lot of Latin Americans have joined, a lot of Brazilian players, and even two Brazilians at Zenit, Claudinho and Malcolm, have gained Russian citizenship recently. So it's more for practical reasons. I don't think it's really a deep love of the country, but they have been here for, well, Malcolm since 2019. Yeah, so joining the AFC, it was close. It didn't happen. It's something that will rumble on, but deep down, I think what Russia really wants is they don't want to give up on being in UEFA, which there's no point beating around the bush. It is the most competitive confederation. It's the most glamorous confederation, especially at club level. That's where they want to be, but it's just not going to happen anytime soon.
Well, one thing that could be happening is they could join the Central Asian Football Confederation, which is the sub-confederation where Iran is part of. They've been invited to the I think it's the first senior competition between these teams. It will be an 8-team tournament between June 9th to the 21st. Russia's been invited. They would be in the same bracket as obviously Iran, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Afghanistan, and Turkmenistan, and one more Asian team. So we shall see how that goes. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, interesting. Really, I think it's a positive step, certainly from the Russian perspective, to get anything resembling competitive football. Has got to be good. I mean, look, Iran are the strongest side there, alongside Russia. So they will, and again, that will be interesting to see how Russian players are motivated, which ones get called up, how seriously they take it. And I think they will take it seriously. But even the other nationalities, looking at that list, there have been Uzbekistan players in the Russian Premier League, Tajikistan players, even here in Tyumen. We had Farhad Vasiev, who was our defender for a year or two. Kyrgyzia as well. We had Valery Kitchen playing in the Premier League in the second tier. So there will be some familiarity. It's not just we'll play with literally anybody. It makes geographical sense. It makes competitive sense. I think Russia would expect to win a tournament like this, or at least be in the final against Iran at the very least. I think probably it is viewed as a stepping stone for now, just to keep things ticking over. But who knows? It may. I don't know what sort of prestige this tournament will carry forwards in future years, but it's going to be broadcast on Russian TV, and people will follow it, and it could be an interesting signpost.
Well, you look at the Arab Cup. You know, that's got a bit of prestige. You know, FIFA have now taken it in as their own competition, so you know, maybe down the line it will be something that they do more regularly and it's a bit more prestigious. Okay, so of course, speaking about the main topic, Iran are going to play against Russia, March 23rd. We've played Russia quite a few times in the last 7 to 8 years. This is probably like, I don't know, maybe the third or fourth friendly they played against them, to be honest with you. Obviously, this is Iran's first game after the World Cup. Russia are not unfamiliar with a few players. Sardar Osman, of course, played for Zenit. Said Azatullah, of course, played for Zenit. Obviously, Sardar was at Rubin Kazan as well. Other players like Milad Mohammadi, was at Ahmad Grozny. Also, Reza Shekari, who played for Rubin Kazan.
Yes.
He's actually got a chance of making the squad. And as of recording, the squad hasn't been announced. Hopefully it gets announced. The podcast this will be in, they will have announced it, so the guys will speak about it. But Reza Shekari is currently, as of today, coached by the current national team coach, Amir Ghalenoei, who plays for Gol Gohar. So may or may not call him up as a favour, having done quite well this season. What are your thoughts on this friendly? What do you think of this game between these two nations, and do you think that this could be a competitive game?
I'm really excited about it. I'll be honest, mentally I've switched off from national team football because, well, it's just been a bit of an unknown quantity over the last few months for obvious reasons. I mean, when you're playing it sounds unbelievably snobbish, arrogant perhaps, but when the best that you can do is play Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan with no idea what's coming next, it can sort of deflate the interest a fair bit. And there were quite a lot of team changes, a lot of experimental lineups. Sergei Pinyaev did actually make his debut in one of those games. I forget which one it was now. But I think that it is a positive step forward for the players. Look, it's impossible at the moment to talk about anything relating to Russia without mentioning or bearing in mind the current situation going on in the world. One thing that I think really does need to be remembered, a lot of people I've seen are insistent that people in the public eye should be commenting on the geopolitical situation. Some have, but the consequences are extreme. They're very, very severe. But what should be remembered is these people they are still sportsmen. They still have a career. And I don't think that an 18-year-old like Sergei Pinyaev deserves to have his sporting ability, his career ruined by absolute zero prospect of competition. So for a game like this, it's a real step up. Iran is a serious international side. Like you mentioned before, we've played a number of times. There is that familiarity. Seeing Sardar Azmi will be, for me, by far and away the most exciting thing. I've been especially disappointed to see him get so little chance at Bayer Leverkusen. I know he's had his injury problems, but it does seem like, until the last few weeks anyway, a bit of a distrust in his ability, which I find bizarre because his record is just sensational. So the game itself, I think, will be really important. I think if Valery Karpin does not take this seriously as head coach of the Russian national team, then he needs his head screwing on properly, because this is about as serious as it gets for the time being, at least. So friendly it might be, but it is of, I think, very, very big importance for the Russian players. And the team that he puts out, there'll be rotation, but I do think it will be indicative of how Russia will approach the next few weeks and months of international football.
Okay, so prediction time. Iran have got a new coach. Amir Ghalenoei is in charge now. The last two, just checked here, the last two times Iran have played against Russia, 2017, it was 1-1. And 2011, it was 1-0 to Iran. They actually got a red card in that game, Iran, as well. So Russia could be looking for the win. What's your prediction in this game?
Well, I think, honestly, I'm not trying to sit on the fence, but I think it probably will be a draw. I'm hoping there will be goals, at least from both sides, just simply to test the mentality of the players. How Iran will take this, well, I think they will take it seriously as well. So I don't think we're going to see, endless passing around the back and little goal threat. So I think we'll see goals from both sides. So I'll go for a 1-1 draw. I don't think it would be right to predict a Russia win, because I'm not entirely sure what team is going to turn up. The best team turns up, they could win, and that would be some result. But 1-1 draw is what I'm going for.
Andrew, I really appreciate your time. Just to finish off then, Shvash at the start, can you give us a little bit about your social media, where the people can find your work around the internet?
Yeah, well, I'm on Twitter at Andrew MIJ Flint, and I write for Heart of Football, which is at Heart of Footy. We're actually looking for some new writers at the moment, but we're looking to cover some interesting stories. So you can find a bit of my work on there. And I don't use the other social media platforms quite as much, but Twitter is mostly where I can be found there.
Fantastic. Again, I really appreciate your time, Andrew. Hopefully we'll get you back on soon. All the best.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks so much, Arya, and may the best team win.
Thank you.
Before we jump into, we've already talked about thoughts, I guess. So when it comes to lineups, I've already asked you, Sina, like how do you expect them to line up? But Pezhman, what do you kind of think? What do you expect Ghalenoei to do?
I think he will line up a stronger team against Russia than he will do against Kenya. I really hope that he will give all the players some minutes, because otherwise, what's the point? I mean, of course, it's always good to be in the national squad and the experience and everything, but I hope everybody gets some minutes. Even the third choice goalkeeper, who is new, who probably won't be in the squad, maybe in Asian Cup, who knows? That will be really smart of him. And then if Iran even will lose 3-0 against Russia, it's totally okay, because you can say, well, listen, we didn't have Majid Hosseini, Purel Ganji, Ali Karimi, Saman, Sardar, and so on and so on. So Yeah, I would like him to be quite. How do you say it? Yeah, he
Experimental.
should be experimental.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. So, yeah, we've already talked about that. So I'm happy to, move on to predictions, I guess, before we move on to also talk a little bit about Kenya on the 28th, also in Tehran. So, Sina, what do you think will be the score?
It's a friendly, so I'm going to go for a boring draw, 1-1.
1-1 is so boring. Okay, Pezhman, what do you think?
On my feed on Facebook, I somehow stumbled up. I guess it's due to my algorithm to the Harambee Stars, which is like the Kenyan nickname for national team, I believe, on their forum, and like if you think Iranian fans are pessimistic and like bad, and you have to see the Kenyan ones. They're like they're so disappointed of their national team, and they're like, why don't we play Uganda and Tanzania? That's our level of competition, but it's good to play against Iran. And when I read their comments, and I was like thinking like, which kind of Kenyan players do we have that are doing good? I can't think of anyone at the top of my head.
You have Victor Wanyama back in the day. I don't know if he still plays, but he's the only one I can think of.
I think he plays in MLS last time I heard, but he used to be good Premier League quality.
That's some elite football knowledge from me, by the way. I'm not. I should get ratings in the comments for that. Oh, he's retired from the national team. Okay, fair enough.
That's quite easily, even with their experimental squad. Probably 2-1, 3-1, something like that.
What about so that's Kenya. What about Russia?
Oof. I mean, that will be the boring draw, I do believe.
Okay, cool.
And Pezhman is usually the optimistic one. So when he says it's a draw, that means it's going to be a draw.
Maybe not boring, but that will be a draw. And it will be due to two teams with players that don't know each other. That will be the main reason. Like, you don't know where that guy runs, or those instructions, they take time to learn. So I think that's the reason. Hopefully I'm wrong.
I don't like, the thing is, like with the scoreline, as you guys said before, it doesn't matter too much. It matters more around like his attitude towards the game in terms of like his managerial statistics, his managerial strategies and things like that. So yeah, I think even if it is a draw, there's a lot of positives that you can take from it, depending on how he kind of lines this up. Okay, let's move on to the fan questions now, guys. So number one, actually, firstly, I want to thank you guys for sending in the fan questions, because I always like answering them. So number one, would you rather Team Melli take the best regardless of age and try to win the Asian Cup, or start the process of phasing out the older generation now? We've already kind of talked about that. But Sina, what do you kind of think about it? I mean, I already know what you're going to say, but just to kind of reiterate.
Like you said, I'm always going to give the same answer, that there's got to be a balance between the two. You have your key players like Jahanbakhsh, Osman, etc., but there are some of the older players that you may not need, and if they're just going to sit on the bench, then I would rather take a younger player who can certainly benefit from that experience. And by older players, I'm more referring to the likes of Omid Brahimi or Kaliman Solifad, like I said, players that may not get on the pitch, but they're taking the spot from a player that may be involved in the national team for maybe the next 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, the next question, so should Team Melli start working with a 3-5-2 formation? Alayar, who's not in the squad, but Alayar, Rezayan as wing backs, with Ezatollah and Saman Haj Safi in the middle. So you've got 2 exclusions from that in the squad. So I think the main thing is, like, should 3 at the back be a formation that we adopt? I'm guessing the question is. What do you think, Pezhman?
I don't think it matters. I think these players are good enough to play both 4-4-2, 3-4-1-2, 3-4-2-1, whatever. As long as they are actually able to follow those instructions and do what they're supposed to do. For me, it's not that important. I'm like kind of anti this specific way of dealing with formations.
Next question. This will be the first Team Melli match at the Azadi Stadium with a crowd in over 3 years. Is that correct? And I guess like a follow-up on that is like, how significant would that be?
That's not correct.
I didn't think it was correct. Yeah.
I think early last year we had a game. I also did with crowd there, so still significant, obviously. But yeah, it's not been 3 years. I don't think.
Okay. And yeah, time to go younger and stronger. We've already answered that.
Feel free to mention their names, whoever asking the questions.
Oh yeah, of course. So the first one was from Sadrzadeh, and then the second one was from Ehsan Moslehi, and then the crowd one was from Junior Rodigan, and then the last one from Sultan Omid. Can Ghalenoei develop the midfield Iran desperately needs with his new call-ups? That's a very good question, I think. Sina, what do you think?
One name that I forgot to mention, and he was one that was discussed prior to the World Cup as well, is Hossein Zadeh, who's currently at, I think, Charleroi.
Yeah.
So he's one that
today,
I think he can certainly be part of the team, and I think he can play anywhere from either number 10 or on the wings or potentially centre mid as well. So I'm excited for him to get more opportunities. Another one that I think, again, I know Arya's mentioned his name multiple times, and we've all discussed it, is Yasin Salmoni, who hasn't been called up. But again, I think he's only 19, 20. Been playing for Sabah for the last 2 or 3 years, so he's got experience at first team level. And I would like to see him given more of an opportunity. So, yes, Ghalenoei certainly looking at it at this point. There are names that can be tried, that can be given an opportunity. But whether they will actually, we will see them playing in, a 3 that works, for example. It's all good and well putting names together, but they actually have to be able to complement each other on the pitch. So whether that happens or not, we'll only be able to see it after a few games. But there are some names in there that can get you excited if we see them on the pitch.
Yeah, a role that we've Pezhman, a role that we've always missed, I guess, in the national team is that creative midfielder role. Like we've had a lot of defensive-minded midfielders. That area of the team can also be very much improved, but creative centre midfielders, we've never really had one that I can kind of think of.
Which is a really, if you were to compare the team at the moment to the team that Ghalenoei had in 2007, that is one of the biggest differences, because back then you did have some good quality number 10s, putting aside Ali Karimi. You had Iman Ali, for example, at potentially the peak of his game, who was a set-piece master. Putting that aside, you had the likes of Mushtaba Jabbari coming through, Feridun Zandi, of course, playing in Germany at that time. So there was variety in there, so much so that you had, in different styles of play that you could kind of bring in to change the game. Now, that doesn't exist as much. So yeah, it's interesting to see how he would deal with that too.
Yeah, and obviously someone could potentially fill that role, but he's not been called up for this squad. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see if a younger player can step up and take that number 10 role, and maybe do that from a longer term perspective. But yeah, it'll be interesting. Pezhman, what were you going to say?
Mentioned Reza Shekari, but also one thing, something that I hope Ghalenoei can do is we always had this problem in Iran, Iranian players playing really good in the Iranian league, but the transformation from the league to the national team have been a step too big for some players to manage, and they look really awful, more or less. I'm thinking players back in the day, Qasem Haddadifar, he was quite decent in the national team as well, to be honest, but in the league he was phenomenal. He was a player that every team dreamed of. I think Talebi in Zobahan back then, in a central defender. These players were amazing in the league and in their clubs, but in the national team they lacked, when they play against international level. So can Ghalenoei be that kind of guy to make that transfer possible, being the natural league player to a natural team player? That would be really interesting to see, and I hope he can do that actually.
Very good point. All right, guys, that's the end of the fan questions. That's the end of the episode. Have you guys got anything else to say before we wrap up the podcast?
Just one final point that I think people will find it interesting. Kenya's manager, Engin Firat, he has quite a bit of experience in Iranian football. I particularly remember him as coach of Saipa, but I just had a look at his CV again, and he was Iran's assistant coach after Ghalenoei during the time of Ali Dai, and he managed quite a few clubs. So to some people who follow domestic Iranian football in the last 10, 15 years, he will be a familiar name kind of for them to see.
That's a decent little storyline there, actually. Yeah, fair enough. Okay, cool. Well, Sina, Pezhman, thank you so much for joining me on the episode. And yeah, just to recap, we've got the match against Russia, the 23rd of March in Tehran, and then against Kenya on the 28th, again in Tehran. So yeah, follow us on Twitter and Instagram to follow those games, and we'll publish like the teams on the day and everything like that. So yeah, thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
Hi, this is Kat, and you're listening to Gol Bezan, and I hope you continue listening to their amazing podcast. Thank you all for the support. Love you, Gol Bezan.